And speaking of the proverbial shit hitting the fan, let's go ahead and get into our top story for the evening. Holy crap, you guys recommended this all over the place when it dropped. Warner Brothers has announced that they are set to release their entire movie lineup, not only to theaters, but to HBO Max. Now, one thing that a lot of people wanted to hear Romney's take on this, and I understand why, because like if you're going to explain the movie business, we kind of need to have Romney here. He helps lend a lot of insight into the inner workings. But there were actually some questions that people have not been able to find. So I was hoping that maybe Romney would be able to enlighten us a little bit on that. According to my wife and a few others, when Mulan hit Disney Plus, there was a premium price that you had to pay to watch it. And nobody could find whether or not you'd have to pay a premium price for any of these HBO Max Warner Brothers movies. I looked everywhere. I could not find it.
Yeah, with HBO Max, it's not going to be a premium video on demand. And this is actually something that they're using to kind of try to this is kind of something that they're using as their marketing hook to get more people to sign up, thinking, oh, Disney Plus makes you pay a premium, HBO Max doesn't. And so that's kind of why this is as big a deal, is that if you're an HBO Max subscriber, you will get access to this full slate of movies with your membership. You don't have to pay premium on demand. And that's why it's such a big deal, is that, oh, you can watch these brand new releases, not necessarily for free. You still have to pay for the membership, but if you're a baseline subscriber, you still get it. You still get Wonder Woman. You still get The Matrix 4. You still get the forthcoming DC slate, as well as a lot of these other films,
including things like the Snyder Cut, the Suicide Squad cut. I can't remember who did it. David.
The Ayer cut hasn't been confirmed, but this does mean that you will be getting the James Gunn The Suicide Squad. You know, just because they want to make these titles even more confusing to keep track of. And so, yeah. To answer that first question, there is no premium with HBO Max. The films will be released on the platform. At least based on my knowledge of it, they're not doing the premium video on demanding, and this is specifically to try to undercut Disney Plus with the idea of being, oh, you want to see these brand new releases? We don't charge you a premium. Come sign up for our service.
The other question that I want to get into really quick with that is, so some people were bringing multiple articles to me where one says it's the entire film lineup that is going to HBO Max. Others were saying it's just the DC movies and maybe Fantastic Beasts 3 or another exception here. It is the entire movie, the entire movie library, and they will both be coming out on their designated release dates, right? There's not going to be like one comes out a week later.
Yeah, it's the entire 2021 slate, so everything they've announced that is slated for release in 2021, they will be releasing it simultaneously on HBO Max and in theaters for areas that are still allowing theaters to be open, because, again, that's going to be a long time before theaters will be able to start running things the way they used to. But yeah, it's a simultaneous release where you can either, if you're an HBO Max subscriber, you get it the same day, but they'll also be releasing it to theaters for a theatrical run at the same time.
Yeah. So at that point, yes, it's going to be the exact same day. I've seen those articles saying like, no, the HBO release would be a week later. No, it's all unilateral. Another question is, so Warner Brothers has 2020 releases that are still up in the air. Are they also going to HBO Max? The only one I was able to find in confirmation was Godzilla vs. Kong, which is like the most anticipated one from what I could tell in the remainder of the year. And yes, it is going to HBO Max, even though Netflix, they threw out a lot of money to try and get Godzilla vs. Kong, but HBO Max won it. So
yeah, and this is more due to kind of a contractual thing, because Netflix tried to get a lot of money because they did get the rights to they funded Godzilla anime, and they even have a forthcoming Godzilla anime that is going to be released on Netflix next year, which is why they were trying to get Godzilla vs. Kong on their platform, because of all this other money they had paid to Toho. But because Warner Brothers has the live-action movie rights for the United States for these new films, that's why it's going to HBO Max, is because Warner Brothers has negotiated for that contract. And another film that is also doing the simultaneous release is Wonder Woman 84.
Yes.
That will also be doing a simultaneous theatrical and HBO Max release. The key thing is that Warner Brothers announced that it would be released on HBO Max simultaneously while also being released in theaters in Europe. And that's the key distinction here, is that for Wonder Woman 84, it's primarily for the US. They're going to primarily push the HBO Max release because theaters are still more or less locked down. They'll still show it in theaters here in the States, just not to the same degree. Warner Brothers is really tailoring a lot of their marketing to the HBO Max release, saying, oh, watch this new Wonder Woman movie from the safety of your own home. And then in Europe, it'll be a case where they'll be pushing a theatrical release in European and Asian countries that are starting to open up in a more productive capacity, for lack of a better term.
And then finally, and this is going to be kind of getting into the opinion portion of this, Romney, is this, and I quote, the final nail in the coffin for movie theaters? And this we'll all respond to, but we'll give Romney the first one.
I would say it's not the final nail in the coffin. This is a very strong and very effective blow to the movie theater industry, but that's not going to be what kills it. This is just kind of a major upset. Plus, Warner Brothers has said they will still release the films in theaters, so there is still that guarantee that those tentpoles will still be there. It's just a case where Warner Brothers has kind of made it clear, hey, we realize streaming is the way the industry is heading.
Yeah.
We're going to embrace it rather than fighting to keep these things alive. And I get the feeling this is probably in large part in response to a lot of the demands from directors like Patsy Jenkins and more specifically Christopher Nolan, who very much were pushing for their films to be released only in theaters. Christopher Nolan especially pushing for Tenet to have an only theatrical release. But as Warner Brothers kind of realizes that, hey, doing this in the middle of a global pandemic is not a wise move financially.
No.
And so they realized, hey, rather than, chiming in with these filmmakers who are, resisting it, we're just going to embrace that streaming is the future of the industry, whether we like it or not. Disney's ahead of the curve on this. We may as well try to undercut them in whatever way we can. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to kill all movie theaters unilaterally. I mean, will the mom and pop theaters suffer? Well, likely. But then again, those have been more or less on the way out for the past number of years, even before the pandemic. I mean, if you go to any...
As we said last episode, it's going to depend on whether or not these theaters can adapt. Because the mom and pop franchises probably won't be able to do it. Whereas people like Cinemark or Regal Cinemas or locally for us, Megaplex theaters, they will probably be able to adapt to some extent. But here's the thing. Are they going to get the numbers that, like, the amount of money that they were getting when the movie industry was at its peak? Probably not. They're going to have to find other ways to survive, and it probably will be, like, through just earning ends meet kind of thing.
Yeah. Plus, another thing to consider is that although this is Warner Brothers making this decision, and although Disney is starting to make a push towards Disney Plus, at this point, they're still not the only game in town. You still have other, although they still put out kind of AAA releases, they're not as big, where you still have companies like Lionsgate, for example, and Paramount. Although Paramount has kind of cut some deals with Netflix, those two studios will still likely be trying to funnel some releases to the theaters, just in a limited capacity. I know, especially with the rumblings of the forthcoming Hunger Games prequel novel being adapted into a film, Lionsgate is definitely going to want to jump on that. But then you've also got Paramount with a few of its franchises that it's got on the back burner that they're trying to push for. And so there will still be some major studios trying to carve their way in. Because, I mean, Paramount, Lionsgate, Universal, they don't necessarily have a lot of the same app connections that Disney and Warner Brothers do. Universal has it somewhat with Peacock, but Peacock is tailored more towards television rather than films. Likewise with the deal that Paramount has cut with Netflix, since Paramount is owned by Viacom, which also owns Nickelodeon, it's more the Nickelodeon stuff that they're cutting a deal with Netflix, but not necessarily some of the other franchises that Paramount produces. And with Lionsgate, I get the feeling Lionsgate, especially given a lot of their more recent deals with AllSpark Pictures after the acquisition of the Power Rangers license by Hasbro, that's going to probably dictate a lot of their strategy, where they're not going to necessarily be expecting to make most of their money on the actual ticket sales, but probably more go the route of, we're going to make most of our money back on the merchandising, because that's the way Hasbro has done it for years. That was kind of built into the money-making model of AllSpark Pictures. Granted, they made some really, really boneheaded decisions, case in point, Gem and the holograms, but it's one of those cases where...
that reminds me, we have another story we might need to talk about in the future, in case you haven't heard, that director got another job.
Well,
I'm not saying it's related to this, but that director got another job. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but I think it was a Disney one.
yeah, but point being, yes, it's upsetting to theaters that Disney and Warner Brothers, arguably the two biggest, are going more the streaming route, but this isn't going to kill movie theaters. What it would take to fully kill movie theaters would be every single major studio basically either A, all being bought by either Disney or Warner Brothers, because let's face it, that's more likely to happen, or all of them would have to all simultaneously agree to no longer release in theaters, which, again, isn't really feasible because, especially Warner Brothers playing it smart, thinking, okay, we do simultaneous release to theaters and HBO Max, that way we still get people paying who may not want to subscribe to HBO Max, but are willing to pay for that movie ticket. And plus, there's also the indie side of things, as well as the import side of things and the limited engagement sort of things that we've talked about ad nauseum when discussing this topic. This is a major blow to movie theaters, but this isn't going to be what kills them. What would kill movie theaters would have to be, effectively, honestly, I don't think that movie theaters are really ever going to go away, much in the same way that we still have books, we still have comics, we still have radio. It's a case of, there will still be a demand. It just, they may not necessarily have
The change that we're more talking about is that they're going to probably have to adopt more of the local scene. And I honestly think that that's the way to be able to do it. Like, you can, the way that we were talking about it is if there's a big concert, you can have overflow in your theater, or you can host regular events. I know that Megaplex has looked into things like Smash tournaments to be able to do on those big screens. Now, granted, right now, the prices that they're offering are pretty steep, but they are looking into it. And that's probably what would have to happen. But basically, you would be, for lack of a better term, the local theater that would do the stage plays kind of thing, except in this case, it would be digital stuff. So that's basically what you can look forward to there.
Yeah, either they'd be doing the local stuff, or they'd be going more the Fathom event routes, where they have theatrical releases, but they're in very limited engagements at much higher ticket prices. I mean, the most recent one, I was tempted to go to it, but, because COVID, I didn't want to risk it, was how they were screening the CGI Lupin the Third film, and it would be something like, oh, we're only showing this film for 2 days, and each ticket costs $20, because we're only showing this for 2 days, and we need to make as much money as we can. And so that could also be the route that I could see them going. I could even see maybe studios going the more prestige picture route, thinking, okay, well, because although whether or not the Academy will still keep this rule after everything that has happened, because I know they've made some changes for the forthcoming Oscars where they're allowing streaming films to qualify. If the Academy is still going to have you need a theatrical release to qualify for the Oscars, I can see that being one of the things that keeps movie theaters open, is that weird little rule after the pandemic is all over and done with, where it's like, okay, we're going to, reinstate this rule that if you want to qualify for the Oscars, you have to have had a theatrical release in some way, shape, or form at a qualifying theater during a qualifying time period. Again, there's been the massive debate between the old guard and the new guard about whether or not that rule is even necessary in this day and age. Of course, that also boils down to the whole idea of, are the Academy Awards even relevant in this day and age? Because they haven't been for the past number of years. I mean, I always ask the same thing. How many lines of dialogue can you remember from Annie Hall?
Yeah, well, and this upcoming Oscars, I have some serious issues, but we'll get there when we get there. Alex, give me your opinion on this. Like, what's your take on HBO Max and Warner Brothers working out this deal? Is it like we just had asked with Romney? Is it the final nail in the coffin for movie theaters?
Final nail, maybe not, but I think it is going to kill off a lot of movie theaters out there. You're right, there's going to be some that are going to be adaptable, but those are going to be the theaters that already have that kind of infrastructure and space in place, like the Miller Complex with the Megaplex here in the Salt Lake City area. Those movie theaters were already kind of like doubling as both movie theaters and restaurants and entertainment venues. Others, I don't know how they're going to survive. I mean, maybe AMC, because it's a big corporation after all.
Yeah, AMC, Regal, Cinemark, they'll be fine. But if you have, like, the one that actually comes to my mind is, like, because the Tower is locally owned, right? So
the Tower and Broadway, those, to kind of explain for people, those are some locally run theaters. That's run by a nonprofit called the Salt Lake Film Society, and they're caters exclusively to independent cinema. They're very much a niche sort of thing. They're not going to be as affected by this because they've always operated under, they kind of do the PBS thing where they rely on donors, keeping them afloat, but they cater exclusively.
But what I'm saying is, to the size that they have, that's going to be what gets affected. And there are a lot of mom and pop theaters that are that size. I already know, like, if the Draper and Sandy theaters were open to this day, they would have instantly gone under by this concept. They already went under, but they would have because this would have killed them.
Yeah, there was a theater that I used to go to back when I was a film critic before it, it was weird. I couldn't decide if it wanted to be a dollar theater or a regular theater because it kept waffling back and forth.
Yeah.
Until finally it just closed down, and now it's a Texas Roadhouse Steakhouse, which was built across the street from another Texas Roadhouse Steakhouse.
That's the logic we live in today. It really is. It really is. It's weird.
Yeah, like it literally it was both sad but maybe laugh. I'm just like, oh, so they built another Texas Roadhouse across the street from a Texas Roadhouse. But from what I did learn later on, it wasn't so much they built a new one. It was that, the people at Texas Roadhouse wanted to move across the street, so they just built a new one and moved everything over.
Yeah, that makes sense because we've seen that happen locally too. I'm kind of with you guys. I don't think that this is going to be the death knell that I've actually been arguing with my older brother for most of this week about whether or not this is the final breath of movie theaters. I don't think it is. I think that they've been adapting for years to accommodate different kinds of events. Like Romney has brought up with Fathom events and a couple of other organizations that are doing similar things to Fathom. So they've already kind of been adapting. For crying out loud, because of Fathom, we got a lot of anime movie releases here. Specifically, I think Broly was actually brought to us through Fathom, wasn't it? So, does that also include...
it was a weird half and half sort of thing.
What about Kimetsu no Yaiba? Was that brought through Fathom? The anime movie that's beating Titanic right now.
I'm not even sure. Actually, I don't think that's had its U.S. screenings just yet.
It hasn't had a U.S. release yet. It hasn't had a U.S. release yet, and that's just because of... Well,
I could have sworn that they were going through a company like Fathom to get it here.
They probably will. They're gonna get screened. Yeah. It's gonna screen like early next year, but there haven't been too many details on it yet.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's been one of the things where Funimation. It's kind of been a difference where sometimes they do it through Fathom, but I know with Broly specifically, Funimation themselves kind of actually did the legwork to actually purchase the theaters to have more showings where it wasn't entirely through Fathom, where you had like the initial event on the actual main release date, but then in order to allow more people to watch it throughout the week, they actually paid the extra money to have the extended theatrical run at a normal ticket price, and that was through Funimation themselves, not really through Fathom. This is where it gets really complicated with this sort of thing.
Yeah. And so at that point, like, I find it very difficult to call this, like, it's going to be a death knell for movie theaters, because I think they already have been building the infrastructure to be able to do stuff like this. And even to some extent, like, when you had MST, before it became MST 3K on Netflix, where they were doing those bigger events, like movie theaters were hosting them. So at that point, like, they're adapting to this particular formula, and that will help them stay afloat. Will they be earning the money that they did before? No. And that's the thing that I want to emphasize to people. No, they won't. They will not. They will basically be earning ends meet at this point. And look, for companies like Larry Miller locally to us, that might be a problem. They might want to sell off Megaplex. But that's just going to be how they survive from there on in. And also getting additional ticket revenue from whatever films that they can get their hands on. Kind of thing. So, that being said, is there anything else we can add into this? Another good question that I want to ask personally is the backlog going to HBO Max. So, like, is Warner Brothers backlog specifically all going to HBO Max? And so, like, if they have stuff on Amazon, it goes away.
Well, I can see that happening after a certain point, where they may do what Disney did with the stuff that was on Netflix, where it'd be a case of, okay, we'll honor these outstanding contracts with these other streaming services, but then they'll just simply choose not to renew them. Or if they do have stuff that's available on other platforms, it'll be in very limited capacities, because you can still watch some of the Marvel movies on Netflix, for example, because of those outstanding agreements. So it's not going to be like, oh, they're going to suddenly pull everything. It's just going to be more like, okay, we have these agreements in place. We're just going to let them run out and just choose not to renew these agreements. And once those agreements expire, then we'll pull it onto HBO Max.
Because what I'm more interested in is the DC animated movies. Because I like the fact that you can get them on Netflix, on Amazon, and usually, like, some of them are old enough that you're going to get them for free, regardless. And I like being able to watch things like Batman Bad Blood, or Justice League versus Teen Titans. And so that's why I was kind of wondering, okay, I could see the new ones going to HBO specifically, but I don't know about the old ones, and that would suck if they went there too, because there's a lot of really good animated movies in there. I mean, granted, I have debated getting HBO Max because of this, but I'm not entirely sold there. I'm not there yet, because I can wait until. Go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
Especially considering that Warner Brothers has cut deals with other services like Hulu. Case in point, the Animaniacs reboot.
Yeah.
That was partially funded by Hulu, but produced by Warner Brothers, and so it's one of those cases where some of those films will still have those outstanding agreements. Especially given that there's also the rumor of the forthcoming live-action Mortal Kombat that Warner Brothers has in the works.
Yep.
It's one of those things where...
And supposedly another animated Mortal Kombat movie, even though Scorpion's Revenge did not do well.
Well, it may not have done well critically, but it may have done well enough financially, and that's the key distinction.
That's true. Yeah. All right. So final thoughts on this one. I think we pretty much covered everything that a lot of people had concerns about. Yes, it does suck, but this is just what they're going to have to do from here on in. I will say one of the reasons I have considered not going into that is because, as much as my wife is excited about Fantastic Beasts 3, we were both very sad to hear that Johnny Depp got kicked off of that and Mads Mikkelsen replaced him. So it's just like, okay, well, maybe we don't want to support that, but we do want to see Wonder Woman.
Well,
so.
Mads Mikkelsen, really?
What was that?
Oh, I didn't hear that. I heard Johnny Depp got booted from Fantastic
Yeah, Mads
Beasts.
Mikkelsen is officially replacing him.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really had an interest, but that's just because, well, J.K. Rowling is also not a very particularly good human being, and I do not necessarily want to support her work, and so it's kind of one of those... That's just one more reason on top of the multitudes of reasons why people shouldn't really be supporting anything Harry Potter related going forward. But that's a whole separate discussion for a whole separate episode.
Yes, and you would never convince my wife of that because she is a Harry Potter through and through. She bleeds the fourth houses. All right, it's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
But she doesn't care about all this stuff. She just cares that, oh, this is a cool movie. All right, so let's go.